Daryl sat quietly at the edge of the long dinner table, listening as conversations flowed around him. His girlfriend, Leora, was laughing with her coworkers, Kyra and Amira, and their polished boyfriends, Dax and Nolan. The upscale restaurant buzzed with dim lights and polished surfaces, but Daryl's focus was on the uneasy way Leora introduced him earlier. "This is Daryl," she had said flatly. "He runs a maintenance company." Not once did she call it his business. Not once did she show pride. He could feel the sting of her detachment, though he tried to ignore it. When the waiter poured wine, Dax leaned forward with his confident smile. "So, Daryl, what exactly do you do?" Before Daryl could answer, Leora jumped in. "He handles property maintenance for buildings." She twisted her tone just enough to make it sound like janitorial work. Daryl clenched his jaw. He had built his plumbing business from scratch and earned more than most people his age, yet here he was, being downplayed in front of strangers. As the meal carried on, the men talked about Bermuda vacations, Napa wine tours, and expensive anniversary surprises. Leora's eyes gleamed as she leaned in, comparing their plans to her own life. "Daryl and I never do anything like that," she said loudly. Daryl blinked in shock. "We talked about Costa Rica this summer, remember?" She waved him off. "That's not the same. That's not a real vacation." Kyra tilted her glass and smirked. "Dax surprised me with Bermuda for our 6-month anniversary." Leora placed her hand on Daryl's arm. "See? That's what I mean. Real dates." Daryl felt the heat rising in his chest. "Leora, what about the lake house weekend? Or the concert last month? Or dinner at Romano's?" She shook her head. "Those aren't impressive. They're just normal." The table quieted as tension brewed. Nolan and Dax exchanged knowing glances. Amira chuckled softly. It was as if they had all rehearsed this moment to expose Daryl. "Maybe we should talk about this at home," he suggested, hoping to end the spectacle. But Leora leaned forward, eyes sharp. "No, we'll talk now. I'm tired of pretending." Daryl swallowed hard. "Pretending what?" She raised her voice. "Pretending this relationship has a future." The words hung heavy in the air. Daryl tried to steady himself. "What do you mean no future? We've built something solid." Leora scoffed. "Solid? You're just content with your little maintenance business. You don't dream bigger. You don't chase ambition." Daryl sat frozen. He had thought his accomplishments meant something. His business supported them both, his home was paid off, and yet here she was, dismantling everything he had worked for. Her voice cut sharper. "Look at Dax, look at Nolan. They're going somewhere in life. She paused for effect. "You can't even satisfy me, let alone provide for me." Gasps rippled around the table. Kyra's lips parted in shock. Amira raised her brows, clearly enjoying the scene. Daryl's heart pounded, as if someone had struck him. He stared at her, barely recognizing the woman he thought he loved. Silence pressed down on everyone. Finally, Daryl leaned back in his chair and laughed softly. "That's funny," he said. Leora frowned. "What's so funny?" Daryl's eyes darted to Dax and Nolan. "So, these guys are your idea of successful?" They nodded awkwardly. Daryl continued. "Dax, what's your income?" Dax hesitated. "About 70,000. Nolan. 85, he said. Leora stiffened. Daryl pulled a napkin from the table, his voice calm but firm. "You want to know mine? 160,000 last year." The entire table went silent. Amira nearly choked on her drink. Kyra's jaw dropped. Even Dax and Nolan looked stunned. Leora's face drained of color. Daryl smirked. "So apparently, I can't provide for you, but I make double what these guys make. Funny how that works." Leora's cheeks flushed red as she stammered. "Money isn't everything, Daryl." He leaned forward, voice steady. "That's not what you said a few minutes ago. You said I couldn't provide for you." Leora looked down, twisting her napkin. "It's not just about money. It's about image." Daryl blinked. "Image? What do you mean by image?" She lifted her chin. "What am I supposed to tell people when they ask what you do?" "Oh, he's a plumber." It doesn't sound impressive. The words cut deeper than any knife. Daryl inhaled slowly. You tell them your boyfriend owns a six-figure business and a house. That's what you tell them. But she shook her head stubbornly. It's not the same. It doesn't have the same prestige. Daryl laughed again, though it was hollow now. Prestige doesn't pay bills. Prestige doesn't keep the lights on. Reality does. The waiter arrived with the bill, breaking the tension for a moment. Daryl picked it up and scanned quickly. My portion's 35. He pulled two 20s from his wallet and set them on the table. Leora's eyes widened. Daryl, you always pay when we go out. He met her gaze without flinching. You just told me I can't provide for you. No point in trying anymore. Kyra coughed uncomfortably. Amira whispered something to Nolan, who smirked. Daryl rose from his chair. Thanks for dinner, everyone. Good luck covering the rest. He pushed in his chair and walked toward the exit. Leora's voice followed, sharp and pleading. Daryl, sit down. Don't make a scene. Without turning back, he replied, I'm not making a scene. I'm leaving. He pushed through the door, leaving the shocked group behind. The night air felt like freedom. When he got home, Daryl collapsed onto his couch, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts churned. 8 months together, for months of living under his roof, and this was the thanks he got. She had eaten his food, slept in his bed, and still, she told strangers he wasn't good enough. His phone buzzed nonstop. Text from Leora. Daryl, I didn't mean it. Ashley had to lend me money for my dinner. Please, can you send me back my share?
I'm sorry. Please talk to me.
He ignored them all. Near midnight, he heard her car outside. She knocked, begged at the door, but Daryl locked himself in his bedroom. Please, Daryl, let's talk. He shut his eyes, refusing to respond. The next morning, she was gone, leaving only a note. I'll stay with Kyra for a few days until you cool off. He crumpled it and tossed it aside. That afternoon, while buying supplies at the hardware store, Daryl heard a familiar voice. Daryl? Is that you? He turned to see Suri, a girl from high school. She smiled warmly, carrying a bag of groceries. Wow, it's been years. How have you been? They talked in the parking lot for an hour, catching up on lost time. Suri was a nurse now, recently back in town. She was grounded, genuine, and full of laughter, the complete opposite of Leora. As they parted, Suri smiled shyly. We should grab coffee sometime. I'd love to hear more about your business. Daryl felt a spark he hadn't in months. I'd like that. They exchanged numbers, and as he drove away, he caught himself smiling. The bitterness of last night was already fading. Something about Suri's warmth reminded him that not everyone cared about titles or prestige. Monday came and went with silence from Leora, except for a second note. She left while packing more of her things. I need time to think about us. Daryl didn't chase her. Instead, he focused on the upcoming coffee date with Suri. Tuesday arrived and they met at a small cafe downtown. What was supposed to be a quick catch-up turned into 3 hours of deep conversation. They spoke of family, dreams, and the future. For the first time in a long while, Daryl felt seen and appreciated. Suri leaned forward, her eyes sparkling as Daryl told her about starting his plumbing company at just 21. That's incredible, she said. Do you know how rare it is for someone our age to own a home and a business? Daryl shrugged modestly. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it. I like knowing I built something that helps people. Suri smiled. That's the kind of ambition people should admire. Her words struck him deeply, especially after the sting of Leora's insults. On Wednesday, Suri came over for dinner. Daryl grilled burgers in the backyard, the air filled with the smell of smoke and sizzling meat. They ate on the porch, laughing about high school memories. When they moved inside to watch a movie, she glanced around and said, Daryl, your house is beautiful. You own this whole place. He nodded. Bought it 3 years ago. She shook her head in amazement. Most people I know are still renting apartments. This is impressive. For once, Daryl felt proud instead of defensive. Thursday morning, Leora's name flashed on his phone. She wanted to meet, to talk, to fix things. Daryl ignored it. Later that night, she called his mother. His mom phoned him afterward, chuckling. Some girl named Leora just cried to me about losing you. Daryl groaned. What did you tell her? His mom laughed. That she was a fool, who looks down on a man who owns his own home and business. I told her you deserve someone who values you. Daryl smiled. For the first time, he felt supported. Saturday night, Daryl took Suri out to a nice restaurant. It was a real date, one he planned without pressure or comparison. Suri looked stunning, her laughter lighting up the evening. Can I ask you something? She said softly over dessert. What happened with your last relationship? Daryl sighed, debating how much to share. She was embarrassed about my job. Thought dating a plumber wasn't good enough. Suri blinked. That's ridiculous. You're successful and hardworking. What more could anyone want? Her sincerity warmed him. When he drove her home, Suri leaned in and kissed him goodnight. The spark that had started in the cafe now glowed brighter. Daryl pulled into his driveway later, smiling to himself. It had been months since he felt this kind of hope. Maybe the end with Leora had been a blessing in disguise. The following Friday, Daryl was in his garage fixing equipment when his doorbell rang. He expected Suri, since they had plans. But when he opened the door, there stood Leora with 2 suitcases, her mascara streaked from crying. Daryl, thank God you're home. I've been thinking all week. I know I can fix this. Daryl's stomach turned. What are you doing here, Leora? She wiped her tears. I'm here to apologize and move back in. Daryl crossed his arms. You can't just move back in. Leora clasped her hands together. Please just listen. I talked to Kyra and Amira. They told me I was wrong, that I sounded crazy. They made me realize I messed up. Daryl raised a brow. So, your friends had to convince you that you humiliated me? That's your revelation? She shook her head quickly. No, that's not the point. The point is, I love you. He chuckled bitterly. You love me now that you know I make more than them? Before Leora could respond, another car pulled into the driveway. Suri stepped out with takeout bags and a bottle of wine, her eyes lighting up when she saw Daryl. Hey babe, she said cheerfully, walking up the path. Leora spun around, her face draining. Who is that? Daryl's reply was calm. That's Suri. Suri who? Leora snapped. My girlfriend, he said firmly. Leora's jaw dropped. Your girlfriend? Already? Daryl's voice was steady. We've been seeing each other for a week. By then, Suri reached the porch, glancing between them. Is everything okay? She asked, setting down the bags. Daryl kissed her cheek gently. Everything's fine. Leora was just leaving. Leora flared. I was not leaving. Daryl, tell her we're working things out. He shook his head. We're not working anything out, Leora. You moved out. You made your choice. Leora's voice rose sharply. I didn't move out permanently. I just needed time to think. Daryl's tone stayed calm. You packed your clothes, your bags, and left me a note. That's not a break. That's moving out. Suri stepped forward politely. Hi, I'm Suri. I don't think we've met. Leora gave her a withering look. I'm Leora, Daryl's girlfriend. Daryl cut in immediately. Ex-girlfriend. Suri's brows lifted, her gaze sliding back to Daryl for confirmation. Daryl, tell her the truth. Leora snapped, clutching her suitcase handle. We're not finished. He shook his head. We are finished. There's nothing to fix. Her lips trembled. I love you. Daryl's reply was sharp. You love me now that you know I make good money. That wasn't love when you sat at that table tearing me down in front of strangers. Leora gasped, as though his words pierced her chest. Suri folded her arms, her eyes narrowing. She disrespected your job? Daryl nodded. Among other things. Leora shook her head desperately. Daryl, I was wrong. I admit it. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean what I said. He studied her quietly for a long moment. You weren't wrong, Leora. You were honest. You showed me exactly who you are. Her shoulders slumped, but she refused to step away. For another minute, Leora stood there crying, insisting she could make it right. Daryl finally opened the door wider. Not for her to enter, but to signal she needed to leave. "Take your bags and go." She stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief. "So, you're really choosing her over me?" Daryl's voice was steady. "I'm not choosing anyone. I'm just moving forward with someone who respects me." Tears streamed down Leora's cheeks as she dragged her suitcases back to her car. Suri stood quietly beside Daryl, watching. "This isn't over," Leora shouted before slamming the trunk shut. Daryl didn't answer. He only put an arm around Suri and led her inside. When the door closed, Suri turned to him. "Do you want to tell me what all that was about?" He nodded slowly. "You deserve the full story." That night, Daryl recounted everything. The dinner, the insults, the comparisons, the final blow when Leora said he couldn't provide. Suri listened with patience, her face shifting between shock and disgust. "She actually said that?" Daryl sighed. "Word for word." Suri shook her head. "Daryl, that's awful. Who says something like that about someone they claim to love?" He gave a tired smile. "Someone who cared more about appearances than reality." Suri touched his hand gently. "Well, I think what you do is amazing. You built a company from the ground up. You own your home. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of." Her words washed over him like healing balm. He realized then that he hadn't been craving luxury or validation. He had only wanted respect. And with Suri, he finally had it. Weeks passed, and Daryl and Suri grew closer. They became official, and the joy in his life returned. Leora tried calling him a few more times, but he blocked her number. Kyra even reached out once, apologizing on Leora's behalf. "Most of us thought she was out of line at dinner," Kyra admitted. "She embarrassed herself more than she embarrassed you." Daryl thanked her politely and left it at that. One afternoon, Daryl ran into Dax at the gas station. Dax shifted uncomfortably but walked over. "Hey man, about that dinner?"
I'm sorry.
Leora was way out of line. Daryl shrugged. "Don't worry about it." Dax lowered his voice. "Honestly, I was impressed when you said how much you make. Vanessa, sorry Leora, has been miserable since you broke up. Moved back in with her parents. Couldn't afford her own place." Daryl smirked. Interesting how that worked out. Driving away from the gas station, Daryl thought about what Dax had said. Leora had traded security for appearances, only to end up back under her parents' roof. Meanwhile, he had found peace with someone who admired his work and valued his character. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Life had a way of humbling people who placed image above substance. Later that evening, Daryl sat on his porch with Suri. The summer air was warm, and the sound of crickets filled the silence between them. "You know," he said softly, "a few months ago, I thought I needed Leora to validate me. But now I see I only needed to believe in myself." Suri rested her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes we confuse love with approval. Real love doesn't demand you change who you are to look impressive." Daryl smiled faintly. "She always wanted to compare me to other men. Dax, Nolan, whoever else. But I realize now, those comparisons don't matter. I'm not in competition with them. I'm building my own path." Suri lifted her face to look at him. "Exactly. And your path is strong, because it's real." Her words wrapped around him like a shield, protecting him from the doubts that had haunted him. Weeks turned into months, and the memories of that disastrous dinner faded into a lesson rather than a wound. Daryl invested more energy into his business, securing new contracts and expanding his team. He came home every night to laughter, to meals shared with Suri, and to the comfort of knowing she valued him for who he was. The contrast between past and present reminded him daily of what he had escaped. Every so often, Daryl heard whispers about Leora. Friends of friends mentioned she was struggling, trying to maintain the same image that once mattered so much. But without someone else's resources to lean on, it had become harder for her. He never gloated, never reached out. He simply let life run its course, understanding that some lessons must be learned the hard way. One Sunday afternoon, Daryl and Suri visited his parents. Over dinner, his mom smiled approvingly at the way Suri held Daryl's hand and laughed at his father's jokes. "This one's different," his mom said later when they were alone in the kitchen. Daryl grinned. Yeah, she is. She respects me. His mom squeezed his shoulder. That's the foundation of everything. Respect builds where love can last. Back at home, Daryl reflected on the journey. He thought of the humiliation he endured at that dinner table, the sharp sting of Leora's words, and the way he almost let them define him. Yet those same moments pushed him to walk away, to open himself to someone better. Sometimes pain was the doorway to growth, and he had stepped through it. Suri walked in from the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of tea. Lost in thought again? She teased, setting one in front of him. Daryl chuckled. Just realizing how lucky I am. She raised her brow playfully. Lucky? You built this life with your own hands. You're not lucky, you're capable. And I'm proud of you. His chest warmed as he realized those were the very words he had longed to hear all along. In the end, Daryl understood the truth. The best revenge wasn't proving himself to Leora or anyone else. It was living fully, without apology, and finding joy with someone who cherished him. Respect had replaced shame, love had replaced comparison, and peace had replaced chaos. Watching Suri smile across the table, he knew the past no longer had power over him. The future was his to write, and this time, he would write it on his own terms. Please like, comment, and subscribe.